In the early 1990s, rumors of a mysterious wreck off the coast of New Jersey led a group of daring American divers to an extraordinary discovery. A massive submarine with no identifying marks lying 230 feet beneath the waves, in crushing depths, where oxygen becomes toxic and nitrogen causes dangerous narcosis. Driven by obsession, the divers pushed deeper into the salt-covered wreck. A father and son team ventured too far inside the twisted corridors and, trapped in the depths, made a desperate ascent that neither would survive. Among their finds was a knife engraved with the name Horenberg, which suggested the submarine's German origins and deepened the mystery. No wartime records mentioned a U-boat operating in these waters. The discovery challenged what historians thought they knew about submarine warfare off America's coast. Official documents claimed every German U-boat lost in the Atlantic had been carefully accounted for, each with its own story and final resting place, yet for half a century this one had kept its secrets. In the summer of 1991, former wreck diver Bill Nagel was drinking a beer in a rundown bar in Brielle, New Jersey, when a drunken fisherman slumped onto the stool next to him and slurred that he had discovered something incredible on the ocean floor. Nagel didn't trust him, but against his better judgment he agreed to meet the man the next morning on the pier by his boat. At dawn, the fisherman showed up looking nervous and handed Nagel a torn scrap of paper with a set of coordinates scrawled on it, refusing to explain further. That scrap of paper pulled Nagel and fellow wreck divers John Chatterton and Richie Kleur into a 6-year quest that would lead to fatalities, betrayal, and the collapse of marriages. The first dive revealed a massive submarine buried in silt. The shape of its hull suggested it was from World War II, but they needed confirmation. Nagel and his team pored over wartime diagrams and suspected it was German. To prove it, they would have to enter its crumbling corridors, where sharp metal and debris made every move a gamble. On September 29, 1991, they found proof, an intact crockery bowl stamped with an eagle and swastika, and the date, 1942. This was a German U-boat, but which one? Almost all of the U-boats sunk during the war had been accounted for. This wreck wasn't on any list. The wreck's location, just 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey, was staggering. Few U-boats ventured so close to American shores, and there was no record of one being lost in this area. The Navy and German archives were silent. Whatever this submarine had been doing here was buried under layers of secrecy. The wreck lay 230 feet down, deeper than recreational divers usually went. The submarine's hull bore the scars of a massive explosion, and the interior was a maze of collapsed passageways, twisted steel, and human bones. Every dive risked disaster. On one early dive, a diver became exhausted and disoriented, and was swept away by an underwater current. It took over 6 months for his body to appear. John Chatterton was gambling with lives. The deeper they went, the higher the cost. Abandoning the mission seemed sensible, but the dive site had become an obsession for him. On November 6, 1991, divers recovered a stainless steel dinner knife from the port side of the non-commissioned officers' quarters. Its worn handle bore a single carved name, Horenberg. It was the first concrete clue, but a name alone wasn't enough. There could be dozens of sailors with the same surname, so the divers needed more. On another expedition, the crew was joined by Chris Rouse Sr. and his son Chris Rouse Jr., known as Chrissy, experienced wreck divers determined to push deeper and uncover the truth. They descended into the submarine's cramped interior, but Chris Jr. became trapped in a confined passageway. It took too long to free him, and as they began their ascent, their prolonged time at depth required strict decompression stops to avoid the bends. They ran out of breathing gas before completing the stops. Desperate, and facing drowning above the wreck, father and son shared air and struggled to reach safety. But both suffered severe decompression sickness and, after being airlifted to a hyperbaric chamber, succumbed shortly after. The tragedy shocked the diving community, but the Rouses had recovered a schematic drawing of the submarine's trim and ballast systems, printed on aluminum and found inside the captain's quarters. The diagram confirmed the submarine was a Type IXC boat constructed at the Dessem facility in Bremen. This was not entirely surprising. Since the Type IXC was designed for long patrols, piece by piece, the mystery was coming together. Armed with the name Horenberg and the new details about the U-boat's type, Nagel pursued the truth with renewed obsession and traveled to Germany to consult the Deutsches U-Boot Museum, home to the largest collection of U-boat records and artifacts. There he found the name he was looking for, Martin Hardenberg. Hardenberg was the only man of that surname ever registered in the U-boat service. It was definitive he had served aboard a Type IXC U-boat, U-869. But there was a problem. U-869 had been reported sunk off Gibraltar, far from the American coastline, and it had never been assigned to operate near the United States. The mystery hadn't been solved so much as deepened. The quest that began in 1991 and claimed the lives of 3 men finally ended on August 31, 1997, lasting longer than World War II itself. On that day, divers working the wreck managed to force their way through a collapsed fuel tank into the engine room, where they found a wooden box marked with a plastic tag. Extracting the box through the small gap between the hull and the collapsed tank was grueling. Crusted with goo, seaweed, and decades of decay, the tag was barely legible, but, after careful cleaning, it provided confirmation. This was U-869, lost for over 50 years. Bigger questions remained. Why did an official report state U-869 had been sunk off North Africa? What missions had brought it to American waters, and what had happened to its crew? The divers, now part historians, began piecing together the story of U-869. Official log records show its departure for its first patrol on November 23, 1944, after 11 months of grueling training. At the helm was a 26-year-old captain, Helmut Neuberg, marking his first mission as a U-boat commander. On December 8, 1944, U-869 left Norway heading for the Atlantic. 3 weeks later, U-Boat Command transmitted Norberg's operational orders, and they were anything but routine. The mission was perilous. Norberg was ordered to sail to New York Harbor. Whether his objective was to spy on U.S. operations or target American ships remains unclear. But by late 1944, operating so close to a major Allied stronghold was almost a death sentence. Protocol required Norberg to acknowledge receipt of the orders. Inside the submarine radio operator, Martin Horenberg, sent the acknowledgement. But whether due to equipment malfunction or signal interference, the transmission never reached its destination. Convinced something was wrong, U-Boat Command issued new orders. U-869 was to abandon its mission and head for Gibraltar, expected to arrive by January 19, 1945. Norberg never acknowledged these orders either. While U-Boat Command and U-869 failed to establish contact, Allied codebreakers intercepted every message by early 1945. They were tracking the submarine but couldn't determine whether it was near Gibraltar or patrolling off New York Harbor. U-869 was never heard from again. Families of the crew received letters from the Kriegsmarine stating the submarine, low on fuel, had been lost near Gibraltar. This account relied on Norberg's last known orders and events from February 28, 1945. On that day, the American destroyer escort USS Fowler and the French submarine chaser LA Lansgray launched a depth charge attack on a submerged contact near Raby, and they reported a sinking, though little evidence supported the claim. Initially, U.S. naval intelligence rated the attack as no damage. However, post-war investigators upgraded it to probably sunk, and this erroneous conclusion entered the historical record. For decades, it was assumed that U-869 had been destroyed near Gibraltar. The real fate of U-869 was buried under layers of confusion, miscommunication, and wartime chaos. The truth is, U-869 and her crew made it to their patrol area near New York Harbor before meeting their fate. How exactly the submarine was sunk remains an enduring mystery. The men who found the wreck, including divers John Chatterton and Richie Collar, believed U-869 was a victim of her own torpedo. Their theory hinged on circle-running torpedoes, a known flaw in late-war torpedo designs. These torpedoes had acoustic seeking capabilities to track engine sounds, and if a torpedo missed its target, it could inadvertently lock onto the sound of its own submarine's propellers and return to strike. Chatterton and Kohler suggested this might have been the case with U-869 based on the evidence they found, or more accurately, the lack of evidence supporting any other cause. They argued there were no records of naval activity near the area at the time of U-869's sinking, ruling out a deliberate attack. Furthermore, the damage to the submarine's hull appeared to be external, ruling out an internal explosion. Historical precedents supported their claim. At least two other German U-972 in 1943 and U-877 in 1944 were believed to have been lost to their own circle-running torpedoes, and the U.S. submarine fleet experienced similar tragedies with the losses of USS Tal and USS Tullabee. However, not everyone agreed. Gary Gentile, a noted wreck diver, researcher, and author, strongly contested Chatterton and Kohler's theory. Gentile pointed to attack logs and eyewitness accounts from the crews of two U.S. destroyer escorts, the Howard D. Crow and the Corey. According to these records, the Crow launched a Hedgehog, a TACAN anti-submarine weapon that fired a pattern of explosive projectiles which damaged U-869. The Corey then followed up with depth charges that further crippled the submarine. Adding to the controversy, the United States Coast Guard investigation dismissed the circle-running torpedo theory and credited the sinking of U-869 to the two destroyer escorts. Supporting that conclusion were eyewitness accounts, including that of Marlon Berkey, who was aboard a destroyer in New York Harbor. After the war, Berkey claimed their sonar detected a submarine that was destroyed with depth charges, and oil and debris reportedly rose to the surface while the destroyer returned to port flying a broom upside down, a naval symbol of a clean sweep. Physical evidence from the wreck further complicated the story. The damage to U-869 included two distinct holes in the hull, which some argued were more consistent with an attack involving multiple explosions than with a single detonation from a circle-running torpedo. Despite this, John Chatterton remained firm in his belief, suggesting a hybrid theory in Wreck Diving magazine. U-869 may have been struck by her own torpedo, leaving her crippled and vulnerable, and the destroyer escorts could then have attacked the already damaged submarine, mistaking it for an active threat. Official records now list U-869's destruction on February 11, 1945, attributing the sinking to Howard D. Crow and Corey. Yet the lack of absolute clarity in the evidence leaves room for speculation, and the debate among historians, divers, and researchers continues.